Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to the very last, cycle number 4 of When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloom, passages or sections 14 through 16. How will Whitman end this amazing elegy? And it really is the great song of death. It's an amazing accomplishment. Some have argued that what makes Dante so remarkable is that he is at one time the most specific of poets, the most universal of poets. I would argue that Whitman learned a lot from Dante, and in this poem, there's no question. You can read this as, how do you deal with individual pain, or how do you deal with sociological pain? I think that's what makes this such a compelling study. Now, our assumptions that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt. And we've given lectures on everything from the very first word of the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass, the word come, the invitation word, all the way up to and including introductory set of comments on memories of President Lincoln, and of course introductory comments to Lilacs, and then of course we've worked sections 1 through 13. And my hope is that you've done all of that work with us, so that now as we turn, we're ready to go to work. Now I just want to point out that Norton's will tell us that in the section of the famous song here, in the first 1865 to 66 version, the Song of the Bird was not distinguished by italics, and we're going to see that now it is. In 1871, the italics were used. The song had its own subtitle, Death Carol, which was dropped in 1881. And then finally Norton suggests, compare this lyrical refrain with the songs of the bird in Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking, and the tree in the Song of the Redwood Tree. And in both counts, when we met those earlier, I pointed out, hey, we're really preparing ourselves to read this famous song from Lilacs 14. Now, just to kind of set up some background information, we're going to get a lot of restatement of all of the earlier themes. We're going to be looking back. There's going to be a cloud covering everything, which obviously will represent death. We're going to do a walk between knowledge and thought of death as we get into this. The bird song of death, as we've mentioned already, this is this lovely, soothing, and delicate song. Whitman will see a vision we're going to find, and we're going to represent the dead of drum taps and the true suffering. He'll say, falls not to the dead but to the living. That'll make us think, of course, of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. The coffin that we've been focusing on through this as it's traveling back to Springfield will reach its end of its journey. Whitman's going to salute the coffin, and then we're going to have the three symbols of the star, the bird, and of course the lilac intertwined, and that's going to be the significant, I think, word picture of the entire poem. Whitman will say goodbye finally to his comrade Lincoln. Now let's begin passage 14 with the word now. So it's as if everything that's come before brings this immediacy now to this moment. Now, he says, while I sat, notice the tense, while I sat in the day and looked forth, and this idea of looking and seeing is going to be central to all of these lines. Notice, by the way, that we'll begin with the word now, and then in a moment it's going to be then. Now while I sat in the day and looked forth, in the close of the day with its light, and the fields of spring, and the farmers preparing their crops, in the, notice all the prepositions here, in the large unconscious scenery of my land. This use of unconscious will take us to Song of the Redwood Tree, unconscious of yourselves, unconscious scenery of my land with its lakes and forests, in the heavenly aerial beauty, and then in parenthetics, after the perturbed winds and the storms, obviously we're going back to drum taps there, under the arching heavens of the afternoon, swift passing, and the voices of children and women. Obviously everything in Leaves of Grass has constantly been about voices. The many moving, notice all these hyphenated adjectives, the many moving sea tides, takes us back to sea drift. And I saw, back to look forth, the ships how they sailed, obviously Brooklyn Ferry, and the summer approaching with richness, and the fields all busy with labor, and the infinite separate houses, how they all went. Notice his use of the word all constantly through the end of this poem. Went on, each with its meals and minutia of daily usages. In other words, life goes on after the death of Lincoln. And the streets, how their throbbings throbbed out of the cradle endlessly rocking. You'll remember this, O throat, O throbbing heart. Throbbings throbbed, and the cities pent from pent-up aching rivers, of course, falling upon them all and among them all. And then the use of the word enveloping. I told you in passage 12 we'd come back to this. Enveloping me with the rest appeared the cloud, appeared the long black trail, and I knew death, its thought, and the sacred knowledge of death. By the way, you'll remember in passage 7, it was the sane and sacred death. Then, so we start with now, then we go to then. Then, with the knowledge of death as, notice all these as's here in this next 4 lines, as walking one side of me, go back to T.S. Eliot. I said, I think so much of 4 quartets is in Leaves of Grass, and especially in this poem. You'll remember in Little Gidding, passage 2, he says he saw a familiar compound ghost, both one and many. Close, walking the other side of me. Obviously this as well takes us back to the Christian story post-resurrection of Christ. And I in the middle as with companions and as holding the hands of companions, taking us back, of course, to the whole idea of holding from passage 13. And we read from starting from Paumanok 10. Obviously as well, Milton's final lines from Paradise Lost come to mind as well. Holding the hands of companions, I fled forth to the hiding, receiving night that talks not. That is to say, silent night, right? And of course, holy night, this kind of reference would immediately come to the mind of Whitman's readers. Down to the shores of the water, again, notice the prepositions. The path by the swamp in the dimness. This will take us to Song of Myself, passage 3, out of the dimness. Opposite equals advance, to the solemn, shadowy cedars and ghostly pines. So still, we're gonna actually have this reference of pine several times. You'll remember in Pioneers, oh Pioneers, this use of the word ghostly. And the singer, now we're gonna get to the bird. Obviously, Whitman himself is poet, represented this way. So shy, to the rest received me. The gray-bound bird I know, received us comrades 3. We'll get this, again, the symbolism with the Trinity. And he sang the carol of death. Carol of death gets used one time in All Leaves of Grass. It's right here. Carol of death, and a verse for him I love. Go back to the opening lines of the Deathbed Edition. Come, said my soul, such verses for my body let us write. Opening lines, and here it is, a verse for him I love. From deep, secluded recesses, we're going to get this recesses thing happening several times, from the fragrant cedars, notice the repetition of from here, the fragrant cedars and the ghostly pines so still. Again, T.S. Eliot learned, I believe, how to use the word still from Whitman. You'll remember this from East Coker, passage 5. We must be still and still moving into another intensity for a further union, a deeper communion and all of that, right? So still came, I told you, the very first word of Leaves of Grass is the word come. The carol of the bird. Carol of the bird here, only use, right? And the charm. This takes us back to Song of the Open Road 8. Do you remember this? The charm that mocks beauty. And the charm of the carol wrapped me. Go back to Eidolons, the way he uses the word wrapped. As I held as if by their hands my comrades in the night, and the voice of my spirit tallied the song of the bird. This use of tally takes us back to Song of the Open Road, passage 6. We can play that game for just a second, just to remind you of the way in which that gets used. Song of Myself, passage 6. Do you remember this? Now I see the secret of the making of the best persons is to grow in the open air and to eat and sleep with the earth. Here a great personal deed has room. Such a deed seizes upon the hearts of the whole race of men. Its effusion of strength and will overwhelms law and mocks all authority and all argument against it. Here is the test of wisdom. Wisdom is not finally tested in school. Wisdom cannot be passed from one having it to another not having it. Wisdom is of the soul, is not susceptible of proof, is its own proof, applies to all stages, objects, and qualities, and is content, is the certainty of the reality and immortality of things and the excellent of things. Something there is in the float of the sight of things that provokes it out of the soul. He will finish all of this by saying, here is adhesiveness. It is fashionably fashioned. It is apropos. As we now move to the song of the bird. It's always difficult, as I said when I did Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking. Many will read this as a song and therefore as a hymn and therefore needing to be sung. I'm not quite going to do it that way, but I will try and change my voice a little anytime that I'm reading this set of lines. Notice it begins with the word come. I told you, it is central to reading Leaves of Grass that it's invitational. And I think that's why, if you have stayed with me for all of these lectures from this very first word come, the only reason you've done it is because you felt invited. And I hoped that you will feel continued to be invited to do more of this kind of reading. Come, lovely and soothing death, undulate around the world serenely, arriving arriving. I love how he will add two of the same words together. We saw this in Tolling, Tolling Bells in passage 6. Undulate, by the way, takes us to Song of the Banner at daybreak. It's the only other use of the word undulate in all leaves of grass. In the day, in the night, to all, to each, sooner or later, delicate death. Praised be the fathomless universe. This is the only time praise gets used like this in all leaves of grass. Starting from Paumanok 17 will take us to fathomless. For life and joy, and for objects and knowledge, curious. You'll remember this use, curious, from starting from Paumanok 2. How curious, how real, you'll remember. And for love, sweet love, but praise, praise, praise. The Trinities are obvious through this poem. For the sure entwining, I could have said entwining, and we'll get to it at the end of 16, arms of cool enfolding death. Again, this idea of being held. Dark mother always gliding near with soft feet. Have none chanted for thee a chant of fullest volume? Then I chanted for thee, obviously death. I glorify thee above all. One time in all of Leaves of Grass does the word glorify gets used, and it's right here. Amazing. I bring thee a song that when thou must indeed come, back to the original word of Leaves of Grass, come unfalteringly. Again, only use of the word unfalteringly is here. Approach, strong deliveress. Only use of the word deliveress here. This is amazing poetry for Whitman. This is unique to Leaves of Grass, is the point I'm trying to make. When it is so, when thou hast taken them, I joyously sing the dead, lost in the loving floating ocean of thee, laved in the flood, only time lave gets used in all Leaves of Grass, of thy bliss, O death. By the way, bliss, you'll remember in I Sing the Body Electric 6, bliss, that is utmost. From me to thee, glad serenade. You'll remember this from Proud Music of the Storm, serenades. Dances for thee I propose. Go back to Song of the Rolling Earth number 1 to see his use of the word dances. I propose saluting thee, adornments and feastings for thee, and the sightings and the sights of the open landscape and the high spread sky are fitting, and life and the fields and the huge and thoughtful night. Again, his use of the word night in this poem is really amazing. Look at the next words. The night in silence under many a star. We're, of course, going to think about stars. Is so prolific in art. By the way, Van Gogh's Starry, Starry Night of 1889, he said that he was reading a lot of Whitman at the time when he performed that, and even this poem. It's amazing to kind of to think about the power of those ideas. The ocean shore and the husky whispering wave, whose voice I know, and the soul turning to thee, O vast and well-veiled death, and the body gratefully nestling close to thee. Savantism uses this word, nestling close, this phrase, nestling close, one other time. Over the treetops I float thee a song, over the rising and sinking waves, over the myriad fields and the prairies wide, over the dense packed cities all, and the teeming wharves and waves. You'll remember this teeming from Eidolon's America's busy, teeming, intricate world. Wharves and ways, I float this carol with joy to thee, O death. Again, the use of the word joy from starting from Paumanok 6, that whole idea of love with all its sorrow and joy. This idea of joy as being so central. And this is why I don't believe that Whitman is a blind optimist. This is why I believe that it is an optimism that is born of a certain kind of thought. It is an informed optimism, as we've called it. Now to passage 15, and of course the use of the word tally, which for Harold Bloom was the central word in many ways of unpacking so much of what's going on in Leaves of Grass. To the tally of my soul, you remember tally here from Song of Myself 25, keeping tally with the meaning of all things. To the tally of my soul, loud and strong, kept up the great brown bird. With pure, deliberate notes, you'll remember this word pure from Song of the Redwood Tree, pure spaces. With pure, deliberate notes, spreading, filling the night. Again, the way he uses the word night is compelling in this poem. Loud, again, back to the second line of passage 15. Loud in the pines and cedars dim, clear in the freshness moist and the swamp perfume. Again, back to the idea of perfuming. And I with my comrades there in the night, while my sight that was bound and my eyes unclosed as to long panoramas of visions. You'll remember in Aeneid 6, we've given full lectures on this, when Aeneas gets back together with Anchises, his daddy. Of course, Anchises now dead. There is this panorama, there's this vision for, obviously, Virgil, of what it means to be a Roman, and it's like it's been predicted from long ago. I think that picture, that image, is really important. As think about how in this poem we've been kind of going into this netherworld, into this underworld, and now there's this panorama of, notice it's plural, visions. And then we're going to get 7 times saw getting used here. And I saw askant, also used into the States. The armies. Now we're going to go back to, obviously, drum taps. I saw, as in noiseless dreams, hundreds of battle flags. The use of flags as a symbol. Of course, noiseless pace and spider will make us think of this word. Born through the smoke of the battles, and pierced with missiles. You'll remember this use when we met the artillery's vision, and I think I even mentioned we'd come back to it in Lilacs. I saw them, and carried hither and yon, only use of that phrase, that very American phrase in all of Leaves of Grass right here, and carried hither and yon through the smoke, and torn, and bloody, and at last but a few shreds left on the staffs, talking about the flags. We saw this in drum taps, didn't we? And all in silence, and the staffs all splintered and broken. It's as if the flag and the staff, the pole that will hold the flag, becomes a powerful symbol of what? Well, not only loss, but also rejuvenation. I saw battle corpses, myriads of them, and the white skeletons of young men. This sounds very much like Dante or Ezekiel, right? I saw them. I saw the debris, and debris, you'll remember from Ashes of Soldiers, when we get there, you'll remember that we met this word debris, dust of debris alive. Debris and debris of all the slain soldiers of the world. And I saw they were not as was thought. And I can't help but go back to Song of Myself, passage 6. To remind ourselves when he says it. He says, I wish I could translate the hints about the dead young men and women and the hints about old men and mothers and the offspring taken soon out of their laps. What do you think has become of the young and old men? What do you think has become of the women and children? They're alive and well somewhere. The smallest sprout shows there is really no death. And if ever there was, it led forward life and does not wait at the end to arrest it and cease the moment life appeared. All goes onward and outward. Nothing collapses. And to die is different from what anyone supposed, and luckier. Back to it again. I saw they were not as was thought. They themselves were fully at rest. They suffered not. Now here's his theodicy again. We, the living, he will say it. The living remained and suffered. This obviously takes us to the line, we the living, from Gettysburg Address, Lincoln's great Gettysburg Address. The living remained and suffered. The mother suffered, and the wife and child, and the musing comrade suffered, and the armies that remained suffered. As I said to you guys when we began our study of drum taps, there are some today calling for, hey, let's just do that Civil War project all over again. And Whitman says it right here, right now. Don't forget, it isn't the dying, it isn't the dead who actually suffer when there's war. It is those remaining. And let's not forget that. And who are those remaining? Well, their mothers, and their wives, and their children, and their comrades. The armies that remain suffer. Which brings us now to the ultimate passage 16. How are we going to finish this amazing elegy? We use the word passing at least 5 times. Passing the visions. Passing the night. Passing, unloosening the hold of my comrades' hands. Again, that last passage of Paradise Lost forever, I think, stays in Milton's mind. We'll get back to hand holders holding here in a little bit, the use of the word holding. Passing the song of the hermit bird and the tallying song of my soul. Again, back to passage 15 and Song of Myself 25 with the use of the word tallying. Victorious song. Death's outlet song. It is interesting that Whitman chooses often to use an exclamation point in Leaves of Grass, but he doesn't do it. He doesn't do it here. Victorious song. Death's outlet song. Yet varying, ever-altering song. In other words, there's always going to be this various carols from I Hear America Singing. As low and wailing, we immediately think of our Dante with that word, don't we? Yet clear the notes, rising and falling, flooding the night, sadly sinking and fainting, as warning and warning. And again, we read Leaves of Grass for a lot of reasons, but one of them is, it's a propedeutic, guys. It's instructional, it's didactic, it's a warning. Before we decide to jump into solutions, resolutions of conflict through violence and through hurting each other, we should probably pay attention to this warning. Warning and warning, and yet again, bursting with joy. It's fascinating he uses the word bursting because, of course, in drum taps, that's going to be what those shells do when they explode. Here, of course, it's the word joy. Covering the earth and filling the spread of the heaven, as that powerful psalm in the night I heard from recesses, the song of the bird. Passing, for the last time, and then his use of the word leave. I told you guys, it's brilliant. I think he's having a lot of fun even in the middle of his sorrow. I leave thee, lilac with heart-shaped leaves. We come back to the very beginning of the poem. I leave thee there in the dooryard, blooming, returning with spring. I love that he uses the word leave 2 different ways in one line. I leave thee, lilac with heart-shaped leaves. Obviously, leaves of grass immediately comes to mind. I leave thee there in the dooryard, blooming, returning with spring. And here, leave means to proceed beyond, to transcend, as we've often said it. Whitman is that great integral thinker. We think, of course, of the great philosopher Ken Wilber here. And the idea of transcending and including, and the ways in which that's what a great theodicy must do. No longer ask, why is this happening to us? But rather, why is this happening for us? Well, it's a warning, among other things, right? Not to forget that joy is what matters most. And then I cease. Now we're coming to the end. I cease from my song for thee, from my gaze on thee in the west, fronting the west, communing with thee, O comrade, lustrous with silver face in the night. I told you about the way in which colors get used all the way through, first drum taps and then Memories of Lincoln, especially here. Yet, and that's an important word, each to keep and all. I told you,